China has a debt problem 3 times larger than Evergrande. Now, the global financial markets are on the brink of collapse, and we are seeing financial bubbles everywhere. Many analysts are calling this the everything bubble, and there's dangers of a pinprick popping these bubbles all around us. Now, China has massive debt and massive financial problems on their hands with Evergrande, which is, of course, China's second largest real estate developer, going bust right now. And many fear this could trigger a domino collapse, just like what happened in 2008 when Lehman Brothers famously went bust and brought down the entire global financial and banking system. But China has a much bigger problem than Evergrande on their hands that most are completely ignoring. So in this video, I'm going to explain China's debt problem that's 3 times larger than Evergrande, what their potential outcomes for this are, how and why they got themselves into this problem, how this same situation is forming in the US right now, what we should be watching for as this risk increases, and what we should be doing. So let's go. All right, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name is Mark Moss, and I make these videos to change the way you think about money because almost everything you've learned is wrong, and I want to explain something that most people aren't even picking up on, which is the massive problem that China has on their hands and how the United States might find themselves with the same problem. Now, most people are aware of this Evergrande situation, as I brought attention to in the intro, but there is something bigger. But the first thing I want to talk about is infrastructure spending, because this is where the whole problem starts. You might be hearing about the infrastructure spending all the time because good old President Biden here has been talking about trillions of dollars to do that. And it's basically where the government, let's say, steals or takes money. The government cannot give something it has not taken. The government doesn't produce anything. The government redistributes. So the government takes money from you and I and spends it into the economy to build things out. We saw this done massive in the United States under Hoover, or under the Green New Deal. I'm sorry, not the Green New Deal, under the original New Deal. The Green New Deal is the new one that's being planned right now. But what happens is it creates a lot of misallocation, meaning they start shoving money into places that don't need it. And when they start shoving all of that money into places that don't need it, it's done because there are poor incentives. It's not their money. They don't care about it. They're not trying to make a profit. And so they just need to spend the money, and they're just going to shove it anywhere they want. Now, there's trillions of dollars in US projects that are receiving this money right now, and on the outside it looks really good, like, hey, let's get everybody to work, hey, let's build up the infrastructure. Sounds great, but there's massive problems that are lurking down below. So let's go ahead and dig into this. All right, so let's look at China and see what the problem is that they're facing. Now, again, China does the same thing, infrastructure, right? They take all this money to build cities, to build roads, to build bridges, and of course China has been the wonder story of the world. They've been growing faster than everybody. They're building massive cities all over China. They're bringing people from the farms into the cities. They're building roads and they're building bridges, and it's like the miracle of the century, right? China is developing faster than anybody. They're going to surpass the whole world, right? That's what they want you to think. I mean, we heard about when the pandemic broke out last year, that the Chinese power was able to build a hospital in only 10 days. They're so advanced. They have so much money. They're overtaking everybody, maybe. They've been working on building a high-speed rail. We can see here in 2008, there was one little line of this high-speed rail. Here in 2018, they have high-speed rail everywhere. They're so advanced. The United States can't get high-speed rail. In California, they've been trying to get high-speed rail going for decades. They can't get that going. But look at China. In just 10 years, in just one decade, they were able to get their whole country. Is China taking over? Well, let's take a look and see what is going on. Now, let's talk about China's rail specifically. All right, so the high-speed rail system that China is building is their crown jewel. It's the center point of all their development that they're doing. And basically, they want to build things super fast. They're popping up cities left and right, building these bridges, building all these things, which looks super impressive on the outside, right? Because you see the proof of work, you see the buildings, you see the bridges, you see the railways, and so it looks good. Everybody's impressed. China is taking over. But the problem is, there's a massive problem happening if we just peel back the covers, which is what I'm going to do for you right now. All right, and when we peek under the covers, unfortunately, we see a problem that makes Evergrande look like a tiny sideshow. Like I said, there's a problem 3 times bigger. So Evergrande's all over the news. There's something much bigger going on. Now, like I said, from the outside, it looks like a miracle. China is this large country, over 1 billion people, and they have mostly been rural people. They've been mostly living in the farms, and China has been bringing all those people from the farms into the cities, and so they're building up these massive cities. They're bringing all the farmers into the cities. They're trying to give them all jobs by building roads, building bridges, building railways. And so as they're moving all these people from the very, very rural areas into these cities, then they have to give them all jobs. They have to keep them busy. But the problem is that they've brought all these people, these rural people, into the cities, and most people don't have cars. They don't have any cars, they don't have any way to get around. And so when they want to go back to see their friends, go back to see their family, of course, family is very important there in China. When they go back to see their friends and family, they don't have cars, they have to ride the buses. Now, typically, depending on how far they move, this could take days or sometimes even weeks to get through rural countrysides in China through the bus system. So that doesn't work. So China has a problem on their hands. Now, the key piece here that you'll follow as we go along is unintended consequences. When governments try to solve problems that the free market doesn't need solved, it creates problems. So when we took all those people and moved them to the cities, it created another problem. If it had been done organically, those problems would have been solved along, but I'm jumping ahead. So it takes people on the bus days or even weeks to get around. And so what is China going to do? Let's fix this. Let's build out this high-speed rail system because that can fix it. Now we can easily get people from the farms back to the cities, back and forth. They can see their loved ones, their friends, family, and everything's going to be okay. Now in 2008, when the global financial crisis happened and the whole world was crashing at the same time, well, it didn't affect China as bad, but what China decided to do was to start doubling down. And so at the time, China started to build. They started to really build all these cities, build all these bridges, build all these roads super fast. And what they want to do is they want to keep everybody busy. So in the United States, we saw massive layoffs everywhere. People were out of work and things like that, but not China. They put people back to work, building roads, bridges, and cities and things like that. So they increased the domestic work because they needed that production, and they basically paid people to work who had lost their jobs and all the farmers. So hey, the farmers, people who lost their jobs, don't worry, go build roads, go build bridges, go build the railways. And so during that time, they doubled down on this high-speed rail project and said, we're going all in, let's build this thing out as fast as we possibly can, which of course looks good from the outside. Now, this is an old trick from what we call the Keynesian Playbook. Of course, there's the main school of economic thought is Keynesian from John Maynard Keynes. And basically it means that the basic theory is that the government should spend to offset the depression, to offset the dip. So the old Keynesian Playbook, the U.S. ran this back in FDR's New Deal. We went into the Great Depression and we said, hey, let's go spend a bunch of money onto infrastructure, and we did. There's a funny joke, and you can see it kind of in this picture right here. And it was actually John Maynard Keynes who made the quote, and he said, if we need to, let's just go bury money under the dirt, and then we'll send people out to just dig up the money out of the dirt. Basically, just keeping the people busy to get the money. Just because we got to keep the people busy, and that's what you see people here digging. But then there's Milton Friedman, one of my favorite economists, and that's actually on this quote right here. He was in China, and he was touring around the countryside, and he went and he saw people building a canal. And all these people were out there building the canal, and they were using shovels by hand, digging this. And he said, what the heck? Like, why don't you get some tractors in here and just clear this out? And they said, well, because we need to keep the people busy working. And they said, well, if that's the case, then why have them use shovels? Just give them spoons. But you see, that shows the idiocracy of what they're doing. I have my own story. When I was in Nicaragua, I like to go down to Mexico, Central America, a bunch surfing. And so in one place in Nicaragua, I've been going year over year over year over year. And they've been working on this road forever. Every year I go back and the roads barely move forward. And there's people there working on it by hand, literally. And I asked the guy that drives me back and forth from the airport, I said, what's going on with this road? Every year I come, it's barely fixed. Why don't they get a tractor and just grade this thing out? And he said the exact same thing that they told Milton Friedman, which is, we got to keep the people busy. So that's what China did, this old Keynesian playbook. Let's just keep the people busy. And so again, back to China, building out this railway. They put millions of people to work. But is that what the free market needed? Is that what the free market demanded? And so just in this track alone from Beijing to Shanghai, just that alone, there was 100,000 workers on the actual rail line. That had nothing to do with the amount of people that were actually making the steel, making the parts, driving them back and forth, none of that, just on that rail alone. And so because of this, China kind of stayed out of the depression. Everybody had jobs, everybody had high paying jobs. It wasn't like other countries where people weren't working. So they seemed to have stayed out of the depression, and they got a high-speed rail for it. So now the whole country's set up with high-speed rail. Seems great, right? Success. We didn't have a depression, and now we have a high-speed rail system, right? Everything's good? Well, no, that's where the problems start. All right, so the problem start is that when you have government projects, you have corruption, right? These people inside the government, they're always trying to figure out these backwater deals for themselves. Like I said, in addition to having misaligned incentives, misallocation of capital. But the big projects have even more corruption, right? Bigger project, more corruption. And in China, you've probably heard, in China, they have even more corruption than in most areas. I'm not gonna get into the details of that. But where things really started to go off the rails, no pun intended, go off the rails was in 2011. There was a big crash, a big train crash. You can see a picture of it right here. And basically there was a collision of these high-speed trains. And when that happened, it was a massive tragedy, of course, but what happened is there was a loss of trust, a loss of confidence in the rail system, and even more importantly, it put a spotlight or a magnifying glass onto all the corruption that was going on in China and on the railway specifically, and that was a really big problem, and that's where things really started to go downhill. Now, let's go into emergency problem-solving mode. What are we going to do? Well, let's come up with some temporary solutions. So what China decided to do is they would take these big companies and they would turn these projects into semi-private, quasi-private. So instead of a government program, let's make it a private program, but of course the government still runs it. And what they did is they took the two largest companies, CSR and CNR, these two right here, and they merged them together. And when they merged them together into a semi-quasi sort of private company that the government still really ran, they were able to go out into the markets and raise over $1 trillion of debt, which is of course a massive amount. And they did that through, of course, state-owned banks, through public bonds. They did it through government municipal investments and so forth. So they basically turned it from the government into a kind of quasi semi-private, and then they went and raised a bunch of money from the government, actually $1 trillion. So they thought maybe that could solve it, but here's the problem. The unintended consequences. The problem is that by the time they had done this, and by the time they had raised the money to go build these new lines, all the ones that the market demanded were already built. So all the lines that had the most important routes where people really needed to go, those were already built. Those were very, very profitable because they were being used all the time. There was a lot of demand, right? But the problem is that those were all built. So by the time they raised the money, they were going to go build lines that didn't really need to be built. There wasn't much demand for them. And so they did. They got all this money. They got $1 trillion. Let's go build all these lines that don't need to be built. And guess what happened? Since there was no free market demand for that, there was nobody there to ride the lines, they don't make any money. They actually lose massive amounts of money because of the misaligned incentives. What the Chinese government was trying to do is to save face. Let's get this going. Let's fix this problem. Let's keep these people at work. They wanted to bring the attention. They didn't want anybody to think that, hey, we're not capable or we're corrupt. No, they wanted to show the world that they were able to do this. They wanted the attention to show that, but their incentives were misaligned. It wasn't because of free market demand. And there was lots of problems, lots of other problems. So for example, the technology of the high-speed rail was great. It goes really fast, but it can't carry a lot of weight. So then it wasn't even really usable. So other than moving people really fast, it couldn't move like supplies, heavy equipment, machinery, things like that. And so it just wasn't really that usable, again, because there was no free market demand. And so because of that, it started to lose money really, really fast. That $1 trillion went into those no profitable lines. They were losing money. And in 2015, they became a zombie. A zombie company is basically a zombie that cannot afford to pay their debt. They're not making enough money to pay their debt. And on top of that, it started getting compounded because the rails started getting old. They started aging. they started needing a lot of repairs. They started to get replaced and things like that. And so the costs started going up. So they already weren't making enough money to pay the debt. And now the costs started going through the roof. And they were stuck because they couldn't really raise their prices. There's really kind of a couple things that were causing it. One, they couldn't raise their prices because most of it was on those rails that nobody wanted to use. And if they raised their prices too much, then people wouldn't ride the rail. They would just go back to the bus, or they would catch a flight, right? If it's as expensive as a flight, I'll just catch a flight, or I can't afford it, I'll go back to the bus. And the pandemic, of course, it crushed travel. So for the last year and a half, 2 years, nobody's been really traveling around. So on top of an already failing business, already on top of making no money on those rail lines, on top of all the increased costs, now their business went down. So they were really stuck between a rock and a hard place. So the $900 billion bomb. Now, China is now facing a massive problem. Back to what I said, 3 times bigger than the Evergrande situation. So Evergrande's all over the news. It's the second largest home builder. It could potentially collapse the entire financial system. It's $300 billion of debt for Evergrande. This is a $900 billion problem, 3 times the amount of debt. And basically, they're stuck, right? It's this kind of semi-private state-owned entity in this enterprise, and they're stuck. So what can they do? Well, they could sell it off to like some private businesses, but the problem is that who would want to buy that when they're losing so much money? So if somebody privately was going to buy that, they'd probably want to break it up, and they'd buy maybe the profitable routes. They wouldn't take the routes that weren't profitable, and of course nobody would want to do that. Then it would leave people stranded. They could close the whole thing down, and it would look horrible to the world. But either way, there's a $900 billion problem on their hands, and they don't have any good options. They're stuck either way. They're facing massive problems. And like I said, as big as this Evergrande problem is, that's about to collapse the entire housing market. If workers can't get around, if they can't get back and forth, the entire system starts collapsing, and now we have this $900 billion of debt. Now, on top of that, as bad as that sounds for China, it gets even worse. China's sitting on, like I said, this whole housing market collapse. And Evergrande didn't just build buildings. They were taking people's money and doing investments for them for retirement accounts. So all their retirement accounts are at risk. We also have, so the housing market's at risk. They have massive energy crisis going on right now. They have water crisis going on right now. And then of course they have this massive debt problem on top of the pandemic that we already have. China has some serious problems. Now the key takeaway here is not just China. The key takeaway is that we need to beware of government projects. That's the key takeaway here, right? They always end badly. And here we can see Biden details a $2 trillion plan to rebuild infrastructure. So we're seeing in the United States, they spend $1 trillion on the railway. Biden wants to spend $2 trillion. But again, what are the problems? One, no free market demand. If the free market demanded it, people would be out there building it. People would be paying for it. But the government wants to just spend money. Let's just get people to work. Let's just get these shovel-ready jobs and so forth. And the other problem is that there's no profit incentive. And that profit incentive makes sure that I run the project well. I have skin in the game. If I don't run the project well, I lose my money. But when I'm taking your money and I'm spending it with no skin in the game of my own, then I have no profit incentive. I have misaligned incentives. And that's, of course, when costs overrun and things like that. We waste money. There's no feedback loop, right? Again, like I said, if I have skin in the game, I'm worried about that. Now, of course, sound money fixes this. It's only because we have this fiat money system where the government can basically print trillions of dollars. Here, a $2 trillion plan, they can print $2 trillion to get themselves into this mess. If we had a sound money system that didn't allow the government to print endless amounts of money, it would keep this spending in check, and it would make sure that we only got projects that there was actually free market demand for, and they didn't go bankrupt because nobody wanted them. At least that's my take on it. What do you think? Do you think China isn't as big of a problem as it looks like from here? Leave me a comment, yes or no. Of course, as always, give me a thumbs up on this video if you like it. If you don't like the video, give me a thumbs down. That's okay, either way. But leave me a comment and at least tell me why. What did I get wrong? Don't tell me I'm an idiot. At least give me some concrete feedback here. All right? That's what I got for you today. To your success. I'm out.